to Liberia Lectures by Liberia Connects. It is the Ladies Lecture Series, and we are very excited to have with us
Cecily
and Nia.
And I am your host and moderator, Lori. So let's just jump right into it. You guys know that it is Women's History Month.
Yes.
And you know, there's a lot of great things and celebrations going on. I want to talk specifically about women's empowerment and how you see yourself as an empowered woman, if that is even the case, and also contextualize that with your Liberian identity. Talk about strength and empowerment in terms of culture.
Being a woman and being a Liberian woman and being empowered, I think that means that being able to control my destiny, do what I feel, how I feel. If I wake up in the morning, I think I want to go have dinner for breakfast,
Sure.
And owning up to, the things that I feel that are accomplishable in my life. I think that my culture has a strong part of why I feel empowered. I think that, just coming back from Liberia recently, I was in Liberia, I came back in January, and just seeing how life is so different for so many different types of women, makes me very, very proud. I feel good to be Liberian, but also I feel that, I'm blessed, so that's all part of me being empowered and, making the decision I want to make about my life.
Sure, yes.
I feel like, so my mother is Liberian, my father's from Costa Rica, so I have two very interesting mixes, and I definitely feel like my strength and my independence comes from my mother. I've always been around such powerful and strong women, and they were embraced, and that was an important part of our family. They held our family together.
Yeah, that's
so
awesome.
I realize in other cultures that strength is not always the case, and I really feel like because of that strength and because of that foundation, I've been able to excel professionally and personally.
Yeah, that's awesome. I would agree with that. Similarly, I look at the different women in my family, in Liberia, on my mom's side especially, how the last 3 generations did the things that they had to do to be successful. So, it's interesting. I think in Liberian society, we see women, even though it's a patriarchal society in terms of rulership in a way, but it's still very matriarchal. And women play a very fundamental role in everything. Running a household and even taking care of business, not just raising children, but being in marketplace and all of those things. We see a very powerful, strong role of women. That definitely inspired me growing up as well. Speaking along those same lines, what does an empowered woman look like to you? If you had to define what that means to you.
I think about, my grandmother and her sisters, she had a strong mother, and it was just kind of this attitude of just taking charge, I was talking to my uncle recently, or my cousin, but he was telling me how, the women in our family, if one of the men had a child, they would just automatically swoop in and just, this child is now a child of the family. So just thinking about, how all these strong women are in my family and how, you can't settle, you can't really just,
For me, it means freedom and ownership, like empowerment. It's having the freedom to make your own choices, to do what you feel is right, and the ownership to take action on that.
Yeah. Contrarily, how do you guys feel that women, or the role of being an empowered woman, fits into the context of relationships?
That's a good.
That's an interesting.
How are we empowered and still in our relationships?
I've been in relationships where I felt like, I was empowered, I could be who I was as a woman, and that was great. But I've been in relationships where I felt that that wasn't the case. I was sort of kind of, my ego was a little bit beneath his ego. And the majority of the men I've dated have been from the continent. So it's something where you sort of kind of have to know who you are and what you want before you go into the relationship. And that's how that will sort of kind of drive the relationship. Because if you sort of kind of go in, sort of not sure, when you're younger, you're not quite sure who you are, but as you grow up and as you experience life, you experience different types of situations, you sort of know who you are, like, this is what I am. This other one is not
for me. So
this whole women empowerment wave that's happening, it seems to be globally.
Yes,
it's fascinating because to me, it's in direct contrast with the stereotypical way in which we think of women and in which we associate with the female identity.
Sure.
So I think that it's almost like the world is rethinking what that means. And I think because we have all of these antiquated views of what women should be doing, we're just in this very like interesting place. And I think it's up to each individual woman to find out what that balance is.
Yes.
So similar to Cecily, I've been in relationships in which I felt like my empowerment and my success was a direct threat. Right? So, like experiencing that, and then being in a relationship in which it's celebrated. It's like, you're neither great, you can do anything.
Yeah.
Like, no problem is too big for you.
Right.
It makes me think about this discussion that I was a part of, this panel, where someone said, who you marry and who you choose to be your partner is the most impactful thing of your career, right?
Yes.
It will either help to propel you forward or it will hold you back.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. I think we all are aware, many people are aware of the sort of the global wave of women's empowerment. And that's kind of by design in the sense that we're used to living again in a more patriarchal society. I would say internationally speaking, that's generally the norm, that we're in a patriarchal society. However, what would you say to, let's say, even what would you say to young Liberian girls who are looking to be empowered, but maybe they feel that they're in a position, how can I be empowered, maybe in my situation that is economically challenged, as well as even young Liberians here who are prospering or maybe in the diaspora. How would we define empowerment, or what would we say that could uplift and encourage one another?
I would say have goals, have goals about what you want in your life. Have goals about where you see yourself in 2 years, 5 years. Some people say, long-term goals are sometimes harder to conceive than versus short-term goals.
Yeah.
But I think it's important for every little girl out there, know what you want. And even if you don't know what you want, know that you want something out of life, however long you're going to be on this planet, for whatever years God grants you.
Yes.
Don't just sort of let it pass. You know what you want to accomplish. Even though I'm almost 35, and there's still things that I think about, wow, why haven't I done this? Or why haven't I tried this, being empowered to say, you know what, I changed my mind,
Yes.
this was what I wanted.
And now I changed my mind.
And now I changed my mind.
You have a right
and
to
not
that.
feeling that you have to be feel guilty, or feeling like, you have, sorry, I changed my mind. No, I changed my mind. That's, and that enough should be it. And being the type of woman that you want whatever child, son or daughter to look up to, I think about the impact my mom had on me, even as a little girl, my grandmother and stuff like that. So being who you are, making your goals, having goals, even if you don't know how you're going to accomplish those goals, put something on paper, have something that you know that you want to accomplish.
Yeah.
Something Mia mentioned earlier in conversation was about choosing the proper partner in relationships.
Yes.
And just to kind of segue into and using that as a model for positive relationships, I think that one of the things that I would say along your point is to choose people in your life. Don't just get with somebody because you feel like they will elevate your life. You have the power to elevate your own life.
Right.
And you can make successful decisions regardless of where you are in the society, that you can choose well and it will enhance your life. Tell me more about that perspective.
Yeah, and I also want to say that, kind of going back to your question before, realizing that power is a gift that you give people,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And never forgetting that. So you can either choose to give your power to somebody else, or you can choose to give the
That's a
power to
great
yourself,
point.
right?
Yeah.
So I feel like regardless of whether that's applied to relationships, whether that's applied to people being in challenging circumstances, you can decide that you have the power to change things. And it might take 20 years.
Sure. Yeah.
But just realizing that you're going to keep and maintain that power and use it towards your benefit.
That's a great
Kind
point.
of going back to your other question about relationships, right? I feel
Yes.
like you can choose to give the power to somebody and choose a mate who is going to either help you
Right.
or hold you back,
Oh, hold
right?
you back, yeah.
And I feel like men are in a very interesting time, right, with this women's empowerment movement, is that they're trying to figure out how they fit into this. Because a lot of those stereotypical roles of men are now being challenged by the women's empowerment movement.
Sure.
So I think that making sure that you're with somebody who is extremely secure is crucial, right? Because you can't be with somebody who feels threatened by you.
Yeah.
Because they're going to hold you back.
For sure. I think this is a great point because, you know, I also know that in Liberian culture, it's a way of balancing one's own femininity as power, strength, but also in being a certain way relationally to our men, whatever his background is. You know, for example, I know some of us come from various backgrounds where, you know, maybe there's not necessarily a Liberian father, but just in terms of your role in the relationship and women's empowerment, I think that to be empowered, I agree with Nia, that we don't have to see empowerment as a way to diminish our men and to diminish others. I also find that in the larger sort of American and Western context, that, you know, with all of the things that are happening in Hollywood with the Me Too movement, just to kind of bring it into if I had a mainstream example, you know, with the Me Too movement, you know, I think that we have to be careful that while we are empowering ourselves, that we're also not diminishing our men. Because I think that that's a fundamental role that those two play, depending on your orientation and all these things that we have in the modern world. But how do you balance sort of strength and empowerment, but also being in a relationship where you are with someone?
Even now, more so than ever, men need encouragement.
Yes,
right?
I agree with this.
Like, we underestimate how fragile they are.
This is interesting. This is interesting that you're saying that. That's the reason I brought this question up, and that's because I find that the male narrative, even though it has been the dominant narrative, that the male narrative is lost in relationship to women's empowerment. And I think that we have to be very careful about how we're navigating that, so that men are not left behind. Here we are, we're always empowering young women and children and girls, especially I look at this in Liberia. There's always organizations for women and children. There's always organizations for, you know, women micro-lending and things like that to get women in market and be doing all their business. But, you know, what about the men who need to be educated? What about the men who need to understand the power of being educated and building themselves as, you know, citizens for their own countries and also relationally for their wives or girlfriends?
Because if you have a man who himself is not fragile, if he feels empowered, then he has no problem respecting a woman. He has no problem making this woman the center of his life in relationship in relation to a relationship. You know, I feel that there are certain things that impact women differently than men, or I guess girls versus boys. But if you have a man who has a foundation, he has faith of some sort, whatever your faith may be. I read something on social media the other day. It was talking about how, you know, there are some men who are very enlightened. They support you. They absolutely respect you. But that doesn't necessarily apply to only women that you feel as a man. That shouldn't apply only to women you feel attracted to. You know, oh yeah, she's bad, so of course I'm going to give her that level of respect. But what about the woman who might be in a wheelchair? What about the woman who might be, you know, however or whatever you might find attractive in whatever way? Do you respect her almost the same, or if not the same, as you would the woman who you're so attracted to, you know? And it made me think a little bit. I was like, interesting, you know? So
I think a lot of women too are also in a situation where, because of social media, we are heavily influenced by perception of social media. So you have to be an Instagram baddie in order to get attention, or in order to do certain things. And that is playing a role. I look at this even, like I said, on an international scale, when I look at, you know, Instagram accounts, you know, that are from people who are in Liberia currently, and just also in the diaspora, and even other African countries, Nigeria. We see there's a very strong, you know, move towards technology and social media, but also how is that impacting our perception of ourselves? Do we feel like now we're living up to sort of false standards of femininity, of beauty? You know, everybody has to be a boss chick now. Do you have to be, in fact, a boss chick in order to feel like you're doing something? Let's talk about that.
I think that is very interesting, right? And I feel like that is in direct contradiction to the women's empowerment movement, right? Like this whole sense of the fact that you have to look a certain way, or you have to be a certain way in order to be valued, is the exact opposite of empowerment, which to me focuses on individuality.
Yes.
So I think that's interesting, right? It's like an interesting point, and I feel like all of these kind of contrasting views will lead us to rethinking new norms.
Yes.
Right? And I think that we are in process of getting there, and I don't think that we've gotten there yet.
Mm-hmm.
But that to me seems to be the counterforce
Yeah.
to this movement. And when you look at people like, I know we're not supposed to name them, but like the Kardashians, right?
Sure.
Who
yes.
seem to have built a whole empire based off of how they look, sleeping with men who are empowered and like having
Right.
babies, and then kind of like putting it out there.
Yes.
It's hard for young girls who are coming up,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
Because you think that this is your ticket.
Or you look
And
at
then-
Cardi B even, and that's not to offend her or
Right.
her music or her journey, because I know she's had a very tremendous come up story.
Yeah.
But at the same time, are we glorifying a certain lifestyle
Right.
as a means of success versus what is really valuable? Is it
Mhm.
education? Is a woman who's empowered? Is it just because of her body, because of her sexuality, or is it also because of her mind, her conditioning, her culture, the way she was raised?
And then to add another layer to that,
Yeah.
how do you then reconcile these views with the fact that I